Coaches, in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I plan my sessions. I go off a 5-part structure. So we have our arrival, we've got our warm-up, we've got our opposed, we've got our team structure, and then we've got our final game. Let's get into it. Now, to start off with, we've got ourselves our arrival. Now, this is a great chance for us as coaches to set the energy, the tone, and the vibe of the session. You, as well as coaches, can also get a vibe of how the players are going to react. So you might have had a player who's had a tough day at school, who might need a little bit more of a helping hand. You might have someone who's had a great day and they're going to be the energy bubbly one who you can rely on for demonstrations and things like that. So that's why for me, the arrival game is very important. So what I usually do is I'll get to the field 20-30 minutes early. I'll set up my field. Okay, and whoever the first person, let's put these over here. I'll say whoever the first lad who comes to practice, or first person who comes to practice, there we go. Next player will come. They will play in a 1v1. All right. Now, the next player will be on this player will get the pick. So that will be now a 2 versus 1, 2 versus 2, and we'll go so on until all the players are at practice. Again, this game has rules like normal game rules, but it won't be you in there coaching. This is a great opportunity for the players to be self-efficient. They'll be able to be make decisions for themselves. It's a good chance for them to be self-dependent. So again, all you have to do is set up the field, set out the jerseys, 2 jerseys, or you can have one team in your team's coaching colors. You can have one team in pennies. And then what I usually like to do as well, especially if we're working on anything other than shooting, is I like to have our 4 pug goals if you have the pleasure of having so. Because I think having 4 goals, or you could have 2 pug goals and 2 gates, I really just think that having 4 goals in your sessions is a great way for players to improve their decision making, because sometimes you'll just have all the players in front of the one goal. So at least for this, they'll be a little bit more spread out. You can help create overloads. You can help shift the team from side to side. I think just having 4 goals during your games is a much better way for players to make better decisions. And again, it's just a great opportunity for players to scan and have their heads up. So once all the players have arrived, they've had around 10-15 minutes of their arrival game, then we can move on to our warm-up. Now for me, for the younger ages, and I've done a whole video about it, if you'd like to go check that on the channel, is ball mastery. Okay, if you're not going to do ball mastery, I think another great way to start a practice, especially for the younger ones, is something like a reaction game. It could be something like tag, or something where they're just moving freely, they're changing their shape, they're changing their direction, they're changing their speed, which all can be done inside ball mastery. So for me, I think ball mastery is an imperative part of your session. As you can see, we've got all of our players. They're now taking their jerseys off. They're all on the same team. We've got every player here has a ball. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting, there's tons of things that you can do during your ball mastery where it's not just dribbling around with the ball. You could start off with their strong foot. You could then move on to their opposite foot. You could do inside, outside, back to their strong foot, inside, outside, opposite, inside, outside, both feet. You could just use the sole of your foot. You could do alternating feet. So again, if you do 45 seconds to a minute of each, that's already 7 different techniques. That's about 700 touches if you're looking to try and get around 60 to 100 touches per minute, which again is very accessible for players, especially if you're teaching them the right thing, where they should be touching the ball every other step. They should be keeping the ball close in these nice tight areas, and then as soon as they have space, like these players here should be driving. This player can drive up here, this player can drive around there. So again, these players in this little nook here can be taking those smaller touches, because we obviously want to teach good habits. We don't want to drive with the ball. If there is a player in front of them, we want to make sure that they're only driving with the ball when they do see the space. So again, a great way to also introduce scanning, introduce distances between yourself and another player, which you could be semi-opposed to pretending it's another player. Once we've done that, we then tend to go into some skill work. So we usually do for our younger ones a skill of the week, because again, we don't want to move from one skill to the other. We want to make sure that they're really honing in that technical detail of that skill, really breaking it down, cutting it up. Again, for a scissor, you're making sure the player's got their foot next to the ball. We're making sure that they've got a good distance so their opposite foot or the other foot can go in through the gate around the ball. Once they've done that, we want to try and make sure that they're using their body to add another bit of disguise. And then we obviously want to make sure that they're pushing the ball with the outside of their opposite foot. So again, especially with the younger ones, when you're really breaking down those skills, it's probably going to take a session or two, depending on how many times you see them a week, for them to really get that detail down. If you only have them once a week, you might want to break it down to a skill in a month. And then obviously you can go through the skills like that. If you do have an older group or a more advanced group, then you could just start randomly saying skills. So you could say first skill is a scissor, next skill is a step over. You could go L turn, V turn. As soon as you say the skill, you can get the player to execute, and you can even start introducing how to combine skills. So you could go a V turn into an L turn. You could go a rollover into a scissor. Okay, so again, as you start to expand your session and your player's technical ability starts to get better, there's so many different ways that can make dribbling with a ball very useful and very beneficial with all the technical detail involved. Now, we've just done our ball mastery, our warm-up. Next, we are going into some opposition work, or now we're adding a defender. So again, I would suggest going from when you've done your ball mastery into some form of 1v1 work. It could be as simple as like we've got here. You've got your two teams spread out. I always use the defenders starting with the ball, because although you are working in a 1v1 situation, I still think that it's a very good way for players to improve their long distance passing, which you don't really get to do sometimes in the younger ages. Now, I know there's going to be people saying that that isn't very game realistic, where we're or teaching them bad habits where we're playing the ball to the opposite team. However, I don't think every single aspect of your practice needs to be game related. I think that we can throw a few things in there which kind of comes away from the game and is just helping your players technically, especially with the younger ones. So again, I'll have my players, defenders starting with the ball. They can take, and I never like to start the game from a dead ball. I like, because that isn't very game realistic, right? There's only 3-4 opportunities that the ball is dead. So a goal kick, corner, kickoff, all right, or a free kick. So I'll usually say the player can take a good touch into the space, and then they can play that ball across. Once they've done that, it will also give the player with the ball a bit of time to come and press over. So we're not just defending, closer to our goals. We can actually get a good distance and make it a little bit more difficult for our player with the ball. So moving into our 1v1, again, this is now a great opportunity for our attacking players to work on the skill that we've just done during our warm-up. So we'll use the scissor for an example. That's our skill of the week or skill of the month. If the player successfully gets around the defender by using the scissor, they can get themselves a point. They don't have to score. All they have to do is successfully use that skill to beat their defender. And then once they do that, then they'll also get the extra goal for scoring. What you do need to make sure is when that player does have the ball, they're not just doing the scissor here, because again, in this situation, you want the player to dribble. You want to get as close to the goal and the defender to be able to do the skill, because the whole point of the skill is to help create space and beat your player. Or as soon as we start to move more teammates up, it can be also helped to create space for a pass or a shot too. But in this situation, for 1v1s, the main part of the skill is to try and beat your player. So they're going to go around, play. Once they do that, they'll go back to their sides. And then the same game goes again. Obviously, if the blue player does score, then they'll be scoring in these goals, red scoring in here. I do like to make most of my games competitive by adding a scoring system. So it will be 1-0 to the Reds. I will keep the score for 5 minutes. So the Reds will attack for 5 minutes and the Blues will defend. Once we do that, we'll switch sides. We'll go for another 5 minutes. And then at the end, I usually say whichever team has got the most points accumulate over practice. So you've got the start game. We try and maybe keep the same teams for the whole practice, for the 1v1s, and then for the next part as well. If it's 2-1 to the Reds, they've won two of the drills, then they might start with a goal during their scrimmage. Again, just to really help add some energy, add some intensity and competition to the game, kind of similar what the players will have during their games. Lastly, on our 1v1s, you don't always just have to go face on. What you can also do is you can have players on the opposite side. If you've looked at a turn, for example, of the week, coach is kind of stood in the middle here. All right. They can start with the ball. Now, we take away those two goals. What we can say now is when the ball played out, whichever player has the ball, they need to try and score in a goal. And if the defender wins the ball back, they must try and play it to the coach. All right. Or you could say, right, that the red can only score in this goal. And if the blue wins back, they can score in this goal. Just make sure that your 1v1s are fun. Try not to make it repetitive. Try not to just do the same thing every time. Can you add different variations of 1v1s? Can you have the defender starting from different angles? Again, 1v1s are very different throughout the game. So that's why adding players in different areas from face on, they could be coming from the side is very crucial, and it keeps it fun and engaging for the players as well. Okay, now we are moving into part 4 of our session. So the whole point of this now is adding on more decisions for your player. All right. For the younger ones, don't tend to overload the decisions going from a 1v1 to potentially like a 4v4 possession game, as we've got 8 players here, or a 5v5, depending on how many players are at your practice. Okay, because it is just going to overload the players with decisions that they've not had to deal with really throughout the session. I know that the first scrimmage included some of those decisions. However, we've gone from that, which will be chaotic. They've just come from school. They've just come from maybe a play date or something where they're trying to just get most of that energy out. They're trying to understand where they are. Now we're moving into, you kind of take away that chaos by giving every player a ball. You kind of bring in the calmness down a little bit. Then we're moving into our 1v1, where we're only adding 1 or 2 decisions. It's either beat your player or take your shot. And then now, again, we want to move into gradually adding defenders and adding decisions too. That's why I think all we have to do simply here, exactly the same game. All right, ball comes across. And now if you're working on the attacking team, the attacking player now has 3 options, right? They either beat their player, look to pass a move, or they take their shot, which again, you're not overstimulating the players with too many decisions at the younger ages. You're more focused on building their decision making and stacking it kind of like blocks. And if you're looking at the defending team, again, from before, you've got win the ball back, try and score. Now you've got win the ball. If you're the closest player, you press. If you're not the closest player, you're covering. Okay, if you do win the ball back, now how can you be in a position where we can go and potentially win the ball back to try and score? Okay, if you've looked at 2v2s, or once you've done this for a few sessions, then you can go maybe from your 1v1s into a 3v3. Or even if this is too hard for your players, you can first of all start off with a 2v1, which again is a lot easier for your attacking players. If you've got younger ones or a low level team, again, trying to build and stack those decisions is crucial rather than overloading far too early. Once they have successfully dealt with that, then we can move into your 2v2. I think it's great to go off your team's needs. If you're attacking, especially if you've looked at attacking. So if your attacking players are struggling to win in a 2v2, I personally wouldn't move on from this until they can at least start to make better decisions and be more successful in their 2v2s. You don't want the defending, and again, if you're looking on attacking, you don't want the defending team to overload and keep winning the ball and scoring. Okay, if you're looking at attacking, you want to get a good amount of success and challenge. It's like soccer's kind of like a scale. You don't want the challenge to outweigh the success because we're not going to get better, right? You kind of want to be successful more than the challenge to know that we're getting somewhere and that the players are taking it on board. And once it's like this, then we can move on. So then maybe you can go to a 3v2, okay, for your competitive part of your session. And then once they start to be successful in this, then you can go into a 3v3. So it's all about stacking the decisions and making sure that your players are understanding what they can do in these certain situations before we go into our final scrimmage. And the final part of our practice is our game, scrimmage, match, wherever you are in the world. Now, this is very similar to what we did at the start, but for me, this now has constraints or kind of rules compared to what your session is. So, for example, if you've looked at attacking or skill work, you could even add that into your game, where you could say if a player successfully does a skill past a player and scores, or assists a player, they can get 2 goals. If you've looked at a possession praise practice, you can say passes equals goals. So if your team makes 7 passes and scores, they'll get 7 goals. All right. If they make 6 passes and the other team wins the ball back, then this team will go back to 0, and then their counter starts again when they go back. You could do, if you've looked at shooting, you could cut the game into 2 halves, and you could say if they score in their own half, then they'll get 3 goals to anticipate longer shots and try and push them to do that. If you've looked at dribbling, you can add gates on the field, and you could say if a player manages to go through, let's say they're defending like this, let's say if a player manages to dribble through a gate in the opposition's half and scores, then they'll get 3 goals. So again, there's so many different ways that you can add constraints and rules and directions into your game that should be similar to your topic. You could, if you've done something now defending work, you could say if a player wins the ball in the opposition half and scores, it's worth 2 or 3 goals. Okay, if you want to look at a low block, you can say you can only win by 1. So let's say the Blues go and score a goal. Okay, now it is about making sure we're being hard to break down, okay, and try not to let the Reds score. If the Blues do win the ball back, then how can they keep possession? Can they make sure that they're trying to create gaps to keep the ball and look after it, because they can only win by 1? So again, your last scrimmage should be fun, because obviously it's the closest that they're going to get to a game at the weekend. But this part of the session, you should really be looking to how to break down what you've done in your session and adding it into a game-like situation. Coaches, that is how I plan my sessions revolving around my younger teams. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to drop a like. If you do have any ideas or you'd like help with for future videos, then make sure you drop a comment. And if you do enjoy my 100-day drills in a 100-day series and the longer form videos, then make sure to drop a sub so you don't miss any of the future videos. We hope to see you soon. Take care and keep enjoying your coaching.